Hi, everyone. I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to come on in before we get started. So we'll probably start at like 2:01, 2:02. Just give people some time. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and get started. Awesome. So, hi, everyone. My name is Celia, and welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on navigating the IRB, or the Institutional Review Board. This webinar is recorded and should be on our website within like 48 hours, so you can watch back. But if you do have any questions throughout the PowerPoint, please ask in the chat, and then I'll be able to answer them towards the end of the presentation. Finally, if you want more information on how Statistics Solutions can help you with your project or dissertation, stick around to the end of the PowerPoint. I'll have some information about our 30-minute consultation calls there. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be discussing the IRB today. First, we're going to go over a little bit of the history and ethical principles that kind of led up to the IRB. Then we're going to talk specifically about what is an IRB and some of the important aspects that go into your study that have to do with the IRB, which is privacy and confidentiality, informed consent, and assessing risk. And then finally, at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the 3 review categories that your study can be placed into by the IRB. Awesome. So to start, the Belmont Report is a foundational document for the current human subjects testing protections and protocols in the United States today. Created in 1979 as a response to the many unethical research practices on fellow humans in the United States and worldwide. The Belmont Report lays out 3 key ethical principles to follow when conducting human subjects research. And so those 3 principles are respect for persons, beneficients, and justice. And over the next couple slides, we'll get into more in depth into those 3. So respect for persons states that human participants are autonomous beings who are free to choose to participate or to withdraw from a research study. So for the participants to be able to make that choice, the researchers must provide participants with all the necessary information of the study. So that can include the purpose of the study, what the individual is kind of expected to do, and any potential risks or harm that may occur due to being in the study. Additionally, respect for persons also argues that those who do not have autonomy, such as children under the age of 18 or prison inmates, must receive some sort of layers of additional protection since they are not able to willingly choose to participate or withdraw from a study. So next is beneficients. And so beneficients refers to the idea of harm reduction. And so researchers should do their best to maximize the possible benefits of research while minimizing potential risks involved. And so this means that the potential harm must be reasonable in comparison to the expected benefits of the information learned. And so we'll go a little bit more into how we'll apply beneficients into the IRB a little bit later. But just as kind of a little preview, some of the most common risks in human subjects research is psychological stress or embarrassment, or a breach of privacy or confidentiality. And we'll get into both of those things later. Finally, the principle of justice argues that the burden of research must be equally distributed and that certain populations should not endure the harm for others to benefit from. So many studies in the past have ignored this principle. The most notable examples in semi-recent years are the Nazi experiments in concentration camps and the US government syphilis experiments on members of the African American community. These experiments were conducted on specific populations who were unable to say no, while the effects of that knowledge learned has impacted a much larger population than just the ones who were treated in quotation marks. And so because of these studies, many others and researchers have discouraged from conducting research on convenient populations. So that includes like students in their own classroom or prison inmates. And so that's all I had to talk about in terms of the history of the IRB. So now we're going to get a little bit into kind of what is an IRB in general. And so an IRB, or an institutional review board, is an ethical committee in any particular institution. They review research involving human participants for the ethical principles that we listed above, as well as some of their own guidelines outlined by the institution. And we'll get into those in a couple slides, sorry. Each IRB board is slightly different because it's just, it depends on the school or the institution that you're involved with, but the core rules all remain the same. And these committees will meet and look over research studies. Then they will either approve, reject, or require modifications for proposed research studies. Okay. So now that I've given like kind of a little bit of an overview of what the IRB is, now we're going to get into kind of the main principles of an IRB that they're going to ask you about when you're submitting your forms to a committee. So when reviewing a research design, IRB committee members consider many different ethical guidelines and rules. But one of the most common rules in reviewing this is that of privacy and confidentiality of the participants must be reasonably maintained. And so this means that researchers have an obligation to give the participant control over how much information they share, or privacy, as well as protecting the information that the participants do disclose, so confidentiality. So we're going to talk about privacy in this slide, and then the next slide, we're going to talk about confidentiality. So privacy, or having control over the extent, timing, and circumstances one shares about themselves, can be breached in many ways. So one way that's kind of the biggest way that privacy is or can be breached is through actual different research methods. So this could be observational studies, focus groups, and snowballing sampling, for example. So observational studies pose a threat to privacy if the information is gathered without the participants' knowledge or consent, while focus groups can't ensure privacy or confidentiality, since many participants are allowed to talk and discuss about what happened after the study ends. Additionally, privacy invasions can occur if the participant finds the study question to be too invasive. So questions about sensitive topics such as abuse, medication, or sexual behavior may serve to make the participant uncomfortable. And studies that include these kind of questions probably should have a warning, like a content warning in the consent form. And we'll get into the consent form a little bit later. So that's privacy. So again, privacy, just to reiterate, privacy is giving the participant control over what and how much information they share, also when they share that information. And so confidentiality is similar, except for it's more about protecting, or the researcher protecting, the information that the participants have disclosed. So confidentiality, on the other hand, is defined as the treatment of information that an individual has disclosed with the expectation that it will not be divulged to others. So the simplest way of protecting confidentiality is to de-identify participants' information or assign numbers to participants to make sure that personal information can not be traced back to that person. Additionally, how the data and information will be protected should be outlined in clear writing in the consent form. The most common form of protecting data and information, other than de-identifying that information, would be to keep it, keep all of your data on a private drive or in a filing cabinet if you're feeling old school, and then only allowing those who are essential to your research to access that information. And again, like I said, the IRB requires that all protections and potential risks of privacy and confidentiality are going to be outlined in that consent form. And so this is where we talk about the consent form. So probably one of the biggest aspects of the IRB is mentioning all of these things, these privacy, confidentiality, as well as potential risks in the consent form. And so, the consent form is the idea that a researcher must gain informed consent from a participant when running human subjects testing. And so this really consists of two parts. Firstly, that the researcher has an obligation to inform participants all of the information, the key information of the study, so that they're able to make an informed decision on whether or not they want to continue on and participate. So this means that participants should be reasonably informed on the study's purpose, their procedures, any potential harm, and any expected benefits. They should also be included or given information on how privacy and confidentiality will be maintained, and any incentives that they will receive for taking part in the research. Additionally, researchers should provide a statement indicating that the study is voluntary and that the participant can withdraw at any time. And contact information for the head researcher should be provided if the participants have any questions after the study has been completed. This information should be presented in a clear and simple manner so that anyone who is not familiar with your study can understand what they are consenting to. And participants should be given ample time with no time limit to read the document and decide. So that's the first part of informed consent. So the second part of informed consent that the IRB requires is that researchers then need to provide documentation that that participant did indeed consent to the study procedures and requirements. And so this is usually obtained in the form of a consent document signed by the participant. And so for participants who are not considered to be autonomous, so such as children, or like we said earlier, prison inmates, any additional safeguards should be set in place, to ensure that they are able to consent to the best of their ability. So this can include tests to determine mental competency, and requiring consent from a legal guardian or caretaker. And so a lot of the times you'll see on a consent form that, like, if you're over the age of 18, you can consent to this. If you're under the age of 18, we need a parent or guardian signature. And so that's kind of all that means. And then, so the last kind of like really big aspect of the IRB is identifying and minimizing risk. And so this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the history of beneficients. And so the level of risk of a research study can be determined by assessing the likelihood of experiencing harm, along with the severity of the harm should it occur. So a researcher should consider the situation, the time frame, as the situation as well as the time frame of the research, as many sensitive topics could cause harm if asked in areas in which it's taboo or illegal, or in, times of strife. Additionally, the subject population itself should be accounted for. So vulnerable or underserved populations who are at higher risk should kind of be accounted for when looking into using them as a population. Therefore, the goal of the study, as we mentioned earlier, should be to balance the potential risks and expected benefits of the information learned. So that means that if there are really little benefits to using an abused population, the risk of re-traumatizing that population for your study may be too high of a risk. However, if a researcher plans to maybe deceive their participants, a misinformation paradigm, we're just doing a little lying, and it's to learn the truth of, human behavior or misinformation or something like that, then the level of risk may be acceptable for the benefit of that new information. And so the level of risk for each study is going to be examined by an IRB committee, and its members will determine if a study's risk of harm is acceptable, and then will make suggestions on how to change the level of harm when necessary. Additionally, safeguards such as removing participant identifiers from data or obtaining additional consent forms may be suggested by the IRB. There we go. Trying to change slides. Okay, and then so finally, the last thing we're going to talk about are kind of the 3 review categories that an IRB can put your research into. And so once an IRB has reviewed the contents of your research study, they're going to process your experiment under 3 categories. And so that's exempt review, expedited review, or a full board review. And so research that's reviewed as exempt is categorized as studies that involve no more than a minimal level of risk, and therefore do not need further review from the committee. So that's kind of the easiest review level that you can be put in. They kind of look at what you've submitted, look at your consent form, and they go, yep, looks like this is no more minimal risk than someone would have in their day-to-day life. And then there's no need for another review. An expedited review, sorry about that. An expedited review often involves some level of risk, but this risk is to a minimal degree. And so in this case, a few IRB members will review the study procedures, and then they'll get back to you with suggestions to minimize that risk. So this could be something along the lines of, anecdotal example. When I was getting my master's, I submitted my IRB, but I was lying to my participants, and I completely forgot to mention that in my IRB. So they kind of got back to me and they were like, hey, this is under expedited review. We don't really see too many issues other than the fact that you're going to lie to them and you're not going to tell them in the consent form that you're lying to them. And so, they just basically told me that I had to add that to my consent form. I did. And then I gave it back to them. They reviewed it one more time, and then they told me that I was good. So that's kind of an example of an expedited review. So it wasn't exempt. There was a little bit of risk, but it was to a minimal degree. And so then they made suggestions to minimize that risk. And then finally, a full board review involves research that poses a significantly higher risk than what would occur in participants' day-to-day lives. So in this case, the researcher may have to make significant changes in order to obtain approval and run the study. And so another anecdotal example of this is I had a friend in school, and I'm not gonna, disclose too much of the nature of his research, but it did involve having participants kill bugs. And so he actually had to go through a full board review because the IRB members thought that it could be too distressing for participants to kind of get to know the bug and then have to grind up the bug in it was like a little nut grinder thing. I don't know what they're called, but so he ended up actually having to significantly change his study so that he was only lying to the participants about them killing the bug, and that they actually didn't kill the bug. So that's kind of an example of a full board review. So everyone in the committee meets and they're basically like, whoa, this is really high risk for a participant. Maybe we should change it. And then they'll suggest ways that you can continue with the same line of research, but change the level of risk. And then finally, most IRBs, but probably all IRBs require that any changes made after the study has been approved must be reported back to the committee for another review. And so, say you've gotten your full thing approved by an IRB, and then you realize, actually, we do want to add a deception into this study. You add it. All you have to do is resubmit to the IRB, and they will probably give you some sort of review, suggest any other changes, and then give it back to you with approval. Okay, so that's kind of all the information I have today. So I'll go ahead and go into the Q&A and look at any questions. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat now. Okay, first question is, I should probably read the questions out and then answer them. So first question is, do we need to return all paper consent forms to IRB committee after completing data collection? Thank you. So it kind of depends on your committee, but the most chances, the answer is no. Usually an IRB committee isn't actually going to 100% check in that you have all of those paper consent forms. As long as you have them stored in a safe place and then they ask for it, as long as you're able to give them those papers, that's cool. You just don't need to immediately give it to them unless they ask for it, if that makes any sense. The next question is, do researchers have to offer incentives for participation in a study, and what would be some practical incentives? Yeah, so it's usually encouraged to offer some sort of incentive for participation in a study. And so if you're working with a university population of students, a lot of incentives can be class credit, course credit, extra credit, something like that. And then the kind of most common one I've seen for non-university students who are the participants is like a $5 Amazon gift card or something within that $5 range that isn't too bad. But yeah, if you're working with a university population, class credit is usually the way to go. Okay, next question. What if you require IRB from both institution and university? Yeah, so that can totally happen. Usually that's just going to involve, unfortunately, going through the IRB process twice. And so, the IRB process can take a little bit of time because depending on the institution, they really only meet a couple times a month. And so you want to get it in before that, they meet again, and sometimes that can take a long time. But yeah, if you have to do it for both an institution that you work at and the university, usually they're going to have separate review boards, and they'll probably have you go through the IRB process twice. And then you'll sift through their suggestions and probably try to make both suggestions from both boards. Oh, and then another question, what if they're teachers? Oh, for incentives? Yeah, so if they're teachers, you just kind of got to think of something practical that is going to benefit the participant. So if they're teachers, maybe you can offer some sort of gift card for teaching supplies, something like that, as long as, it doesn't have to be large. It doesn't have to be more than $5, but as long as they're getting some sort of incentive for participating in this study. And then, okay, awesome. It doesn't look like any more questions are coming in. So my coworker, Sierra, has put some free dissertation resources and archive resources in the chat, as well as kind of mentioning, like always, that these webinars are going to be sent out about 24 to 48 hours after the webinar finishes. And then, so last thing I just want to do, if I can get my slide to change, perfect, is I just want to talk a little bit about our company. So Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation consulting company, and we provide people and students with support on their dissertation and projects. So we do 30-minute complimentary consultation calls on Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. And my boss actually does that. Her name is Janine. And so her contact information is on the screen. If you are interested in getting any support from us, whether that has to do with, editing your paper, working on your results, your chapter 5, we do chapters 1 through 5 here. Go ahead and, sign up for a complimentary 30-minute consultation call with Janine. So I'll leave this stuff up on the screen for a couple seconds, and then I'll go ahead and stop sharing because that is the end of this presentation. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for showing up and asking such good questions. I really hope that, we could have helped you out today. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And we'll see you at the next webinar.